Right, this is going to get me in trouble with CSB. This is, it's, from a legal point of view, it's very possible that you may actually be employed. I think the CSB still provides a fixed sum. Do you still get a fixed sum?
It's a fixed sum of £75 a week.
Yeah, this is a secret that CSB want to keep slightly hidden, is that there's a very strong possibility that you are actually legally employed. What that means is that it's likely that there's a contract in place between you and your organisation, because in effect you are getting a sum, I mean a very small sum, but a sum in return. In terms of what you get for actual full-time jobs, a small sum in return for the work you're providing, especially given that, as you say, you've got things like fixed hours of work and very clear control over what you're doing by the organisation. Strong possibility that if you went to an employment tribunal, you could actually have your case heard for, say, discrimination or for unfair dismissal. So, if you sought rights, you might have some of them. It's difficult because some rights come through, try to explain it as briefly as I can. There are two categories of employment. There's a broad form of employment, which basically, if there's a contract between you and the organisation, you fall into. And that gives you the right to protection from discrimination, to be covered by the working time regulations, and the interesting one is minimum wage. You'd be covered by the minimum wage. To get the rest of the employment rights that most of us would take for granted, so right to paternity leave in your case, sick leave and so on, you'd have to prove that you met a kind of a higher threshold of employment that the Employment Rights Act, which is the act that lots of those other rights come from, has. And you may do, actually, because because your role is very work-like, you may fall into that higher category. So yes, you may, if it came to it, you may have rights that you could enforce. It only comes about if you feel that you've been poorly treated and therefore seek access to those rights, which would mean going to an employment tribunal. Now, most volunteers, if they tried that, they wouldn't be heard by the tribunal. The tribunal would look at the situation and say, well, no, you're not employed, so we can't hear your case. In your case, they may look at what's going on and say, yes, there's a contract in place, you were employed, therefore we'll actually hear the case about you being unfairly dismissed or discriminated against and so on. The reason that these cases only come up where someone has felt poorly treated, and there have been a handful of cases where this happened, but it is a possibility where there are those situations in place. Let's say receiving something of value in return for the work that you're doing may very well be seen as a contract if it came to it.
As a volunteer, how are any of those ones, any of those rights still?
No, they're not. Okay, this is the quick answer. The volunteers don't have any, well, by coming forward as a volunteer, you don't get any new rights. So you don't get any of the protections that we take for granted as paid workers, so the protection from discrimination, protection from unfair dismissal. You don't lose any rights through being a volunteer, so your organisation has to take account of your health and safety, they have to keep your information confidential. If you're a young volunteer, you've got to take account of safeguarding issues and so on. So you don't lose any rights through being a volunteer, but you don't gain the rights that you'd expect through being an employee.
I think what Mark's done very well there is identify all the pitfalls that can happen. emphasise how important it is that only real expenses are actually refunded, because if a flat rate is given, or if refunds are given without receipts, you could end up in a situation where people are receiving over and above what it costs them to volunteer, and therefore they're receiving a benefit or a consideration, and their contract can be created. It can also affect people's benefits, income support or job seeker allowance, things like that. So it is important to think about those things. Hopefully we covered that on sufficiently.
Okay.
So I should probably add that as a CSV volunteer, you might not be eligible for the minimum wage, just in case I set your mind thinking. The way that CSV operates is, has a specific loophole within the National Minimum Wage Act, so that full-time CSV volunteers aren't eligible for minimum wage. No, well, again, that's by taking up a full-time position where you're not available for and actively seeking work. Yes, again, you would be eligible for benefits. But the case that Jack mentioned about expenses in general, about reimbursing people's actual costs, another reason is for people who are on benefits, if they're seen to receive income. So that would be if they're receiving money where either it's a flat rate or there's no evidence of their actual costs, then the Job Centre could, as well as docking the benefits, if they're on means-tested benefits, in any case they won't see them as being volunteers, they'll see their activities being paid work and treat them under those rules. So that's another reason why reimbursing people's actual expenses as much as possible against evidence like receipts is really important.
Just one thing to point out is that Volunteer Centre Camden isn't an advice-giving organisation, and we're not actually set up to provide legal advice. So if you do want to look into anything legal, I suggest you take it.
Yeah, I just remembered, yes, for the purposes of my insurance, I'm not a lawyer. Have absolutely no legal training whatsoever, so it's guidance.
Okay.